Welcome to Focus Washington. I'm Chuck Conconi. My guest today is Christina Wilkie, who writes the In the Know column on the Hill newspaper.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to sit down with you.
Well, it's great to have you because, as you know, I covered a lot of social Washington, and now you're doing it on a major scale.
And I feel like you're the dean, and I'm sitting down with the dean.
The old dean, yes. Tell me, now, of course, in the previous administration, the Bush administration, my instinct was that they did very little socially. What's the difference in covering this administration?
This administration makes a concerted effort to engage the arts in the White House, to engage the they consider the administration, I think, to exist after 5. They see it as a strategic part of whether it's their policy and the president giving a speech at the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute on Wednesday, or their arts education in performance at the White House series. So I think they keep the White House open after 5, whereas the Bushes went to bed at 8.
What was it with the Bushes? I mean, I know that Mrs. Bush was very interested in reading for children,
right,
being a former school librarian, but I never saw them around town socially, unless they had to do something like, the Kennedy Center Honors or the Ford's Theater Gala.
Right, well, and I think they came here with the impression that they were outsiders from Texas. They brought in their whole team. They stayed really insular with their team. I mean, of course, the president didn't drink, so that sort of put a different energy to the evening. People wouldn't drink at the White House, sort of in his company. And he said goodnight to his guests at about 8 o'clock. So there were none of the after dinner concerts and the sort of the feeling that the president is entertaining. The president didn't like to entertain, and he had a very close knit group of friends that he brought with him from Texas and left and went back to Texas.
Well, that's ironic because his father, of course, was the ultimate Washington insider. Right. And even though he didn't do as much, he did go out some. Yes,
well, and I think that speaks to the schism perhaps between Bush Sr. and Bush Jr. I mean, as people, and and George W. Bush never felt as comfortable around strangers. I mean, anyone who's ever met him, he was a more insular person than his father. He wasn't raised in the old tradition, and when he came here, he felt like people in Washington were trying to trick him, I think, sometimes. So he was on the defensive, and it didn't necessarily behoove him to be out in the city.
That's fascinating. I mean, the master of it all, of course, was the Reagan administration, which, of course, you're too young to have remembered. But
though I sort of have dreams of and enamored of.
There is, don't you agree, a certain power to the White House that can be very effective for you.
Especially when it's done right. And the White House has the power to extend its arms, whatever tone it chooses, into the whole city. And and the Obamas have come in, and they've certainly opened the doors, and they made their initial pledge was that this would be the people's house, and that they would bring more people, more of America, and certainly more of Washington into the White House than arguably before in the last certainly 30 years that I've sort of known of this. And so they've brought school children in, and they've brought community members in, and they've gone out, I mean, certainly more than the Bushes ever did, for dinner. And so I think they've engaged a little bit, but they've run into some bumps in the last year.
Well, do you think because of the economic situation that they've pulled back a little bit?
That puts them in a tough situation. And I mean, it's certainly, there was a huge backlash this past week to news that they would be at 2 black ties this week. And they have the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and the Congressional Black Caucus, both in the same week. And we have a shortened congressional session this fall. So we just have to do more in less time. And people were furious, and they had the impression that the Obamas were going out and swilling champagne while Rome burned.
Well, it's interesting because what fascinates me is the power. Do you think it would be more effective for the president if he invited Boehner or people like that to events at the White House? Because there's nothing more special than going to the White House.
Yes, and that speaks again to using the power of the White House to have wide open arms. And I think there was something lost. I mean, and people have said this on other policy levels, but in the pledge of bipartisanship and the pledge that this would be a big tent in Washington, and it hasn't played out the way it sounded on Capitol Hill, and I think the White House is a reflection of that.
Thank you, Christina. We're run out of time. Christina Wilkie, who writes the In the Know column for the Hill newspaper. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Chuck Conconi, and this has been Focus Washington.